Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to Canary Media's Manufacturing live stream discussion with Jigar Shah, head of the DOE's Loan Program Office. I'm Eric Wesoff. I'm the editorial director at Canary Media. Hello, Jigar. Thanks for making it, and we're grateful for your attendance. Let me talk a little bit more about do this intro a little bit more, and then we'll get on with it. Today's conversation with Jigar is part of Canary's special series on clean energy manufacturing. We've dedicated our coverage this week to the boom in climate tech manufacturing in the US, and you can find an in-depth exploration of the American manufacturing renaissance on our site this week and pretty much every week. We're reporting on the nearly 100 factories or expansions of manufacturing sites across the value chain in wind, solar, EVs, and batteries. This surge of manufacturing is being driven by almost $400 billion in incentives and programs in the Inflation Reduction Act, and also by the Department of Energy's, the office that Jigar leads, which has $394 billion in lending authority for clean tech projects. The Loan Program Office, the LPO, has already issued about $36 billion in loans spread across programs like energy infrastructure, advanced transportation, and tribal programs. Many, although not all of these loans have gone to clean tech manufacturers like Ford and Ultium, which each closed multi-billion-dollar loans last year. Manufacturing is a huge topic, and we can't cover all of the facets. So our goal is to cover stuff that is actually being built in factories, not on moonshots like fusion or direct air capture. And that's a rough fit for the focus areas of the LPO, which looks to fund clean tech that's ready to scale. So we're hoping to get some straight talk from Jigar on how the inflation. Well, we were used to getting straight talk from Jigar before he was head of the LPO. We're hoping to get straight talk from him about how the IRA and the LPO are spurring domestic EV, solar, and battery manufacturing. Let's get into it. So, Jigar, thanks for making it. Again, we're grateful for you appearing and for your role and accomplishments in the energy world.
My pleasure.
Great. Can you give us for those few people in the audience who don't know what you do, can you give us the elevator pitch on the LPO and your mission?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I apologize for my technical setup difficulties. The Loan Programs Office has been around for a long time, as you know. The 2005 Energy Act is when we were created. We were largely created, frankly, to support the construction of nuclear power plants. That mandate expanded into including renewable energy and fossil energy systems, as well as the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, where famously we funded Tesla, Ford, Nissan. Today, our mandate has expanded even further to include the Tribal Energy Loan Program, as well as the CO2 pipeline financing program, and now the 1706 Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, where we're helping existing energy assets, old pipelines, refineries, coal plants, natural gas plants, find their place in the energy transformation, right? Converting them into a nuclear plant, into a solar plus storage plant, et cetera. We serve manufacturing from a number of places, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act gave us an additional $100 billion of loan authority within the Innovative Clean Energy Program, the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, and the Tribal Program. And so I would say traditionally, most of our manufacturing has come out of the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, but increasingly we're starting to see supply chain loans coming in for offshore wind, for non-automotive battery manufacturing applications, for like utility scale batteries, basically, like the solar manufacturing plants that are supported by SEMA. You're starting to see manufacturing of onshoring of like transmission line wire, things like that frankly we've been importing for decades. And then obviously a very large focus on critical minerals and critical minerals processing here in the country.
I'm sure. I think this week you were speaking to a Senate subcommittee about critical minerals.
There's definitely a lot of interest.
For sure. So on that topic, the IRA is intent on creating supply chains. It's not as if you want to just build a module plant or a EV company. You want to have the lithium to make the battery for the EV. You want to have the cells for the module to make the solar panel. The IRA tries to look at this holistically from critical materials to end product. Does the LPO have that luxury of looking at it in the context of a supply chain, or does each loan that you make has to is that part of the strategy of the LPO? Is because I don't want to talk too much about nuclear, but you can't fund advanced nuclear in some cases without funding advanced nuclear fuels. And so if you fund a reactor, do you go searching for a HALEU company to loan to make that?
A better example may be if we fund a cell and module manufacturing company for solar, do we want the wafers and poly to come from the US or from China, right? So, I mean, in general, I would say that the Loan Programs Office has a pretty long outlook, right? I mean, one of the things that I think people have a hard time fathoming is when you look at the commercial banking sector, they largely are only taking 5-year risk, right? They might give you a 20-year loan, but they're not holding a loan for 20 years. They're generally like holding a loan for 5 years, selling it off to someone else, et cetera, right? So we hold our loans for 20 years. I still have all of the loans for the solar thermal electric plants, some of these other projects, right? So we do have to live with the consequences of what we funded. And so all of these issues are relevant, right? Like, what will the likelihood be that they're going to be able to secure consistent supply of wafer or poly from another country, right? I mean, clearly our loans are subject to U.S. trade policy in the future, a future administration that might come into place, right? And so while we're not looking to be subjective about these things where we say, well, we would have a preference for you to, buy your, wafers only from this company. We do have to be thoughtful about all of the different failure mechanisms of our loans. And in this era of shortening supply chains, which frankly happened and was reinforced during COVID, we are very thoughtful about saying, if one country is dominating the supply of an item, is it likely that that country will be able to continue to supply that product without trade tariffs or other things, right? And so we do try to pursue de-risking across all of those variables.
All right. So you're like a bank, but you have to be even more stringent with your due diligence because it is a 20-year.
Right. Exactly.
So a couple of days ago, I think you spoke at a ACOR event, and sorry, we have people everywhere listening to you, and
clearly that happened yesterday.
And you said that the level of ambition in the financial industry was somewhat low. So can you talk a little bit about that? That's a direct quote from one of our moles at that event. So
I definitely said it. Look, I think the ambition of the IRA is very high, right? And I frankly think that when you think about the tools that we have in the IRA, we expect at least 40% carbon reductions by 2030, right? That means that we've got to get from 30 gigawatts a year today to much higher numbers in the future, right? And the question really becomes, how do we do that? As you know, the solar and wind industry have been in a status of rewriting their business plans every 3 years since I was a solar entrepreneur. So that's not new information. But I think what I sensed in the room yesterday was that they were not rewriting their business plans. They were saying, how do we execute on the business plan that we had 2 years ago today? And, my point to them is that that's not where we are today, right? And so we've got to figure out how to get more manufacturing here in this country. And I'm pleasantly surprised to see how many offtake agreements are being signed, how many big announcements are being made in terms of manufacturing, which I think is great. But I also think we have to be cognizant of the fact that the interconnection queue issues and transmission issues are things that we are working hard to resolve. And I think we have a plan in place to resolve it, but they're not going to get solved next week, right? And so if we want to build more capacity fast, which we should be able to do, we have all these bonus adders for domestic content, for energy communities, for other things. We may have to start looking more at DG.
Yeah, you did mention that there's 300 gigawatts of commercial and industrial rooftops awaiting solar panels. It's a little bit easier to do than transmission. You mentioned that as well, and yet it's not happening very quickly.
Yeah, but I think that the goal here is to figure out how we more confidently support manufacturing in this country and support the deployment of more product faster, right? So we should be doing as much utility scale solar as we possibly can. And we should be de-risking transmission lines and others. And we are doing that. I think the Secretary and John Podesta and others have made big announcements in this area. And I think we're following through on those things. But the low-hanging fruit is, there's a whole bunch of C&I customers that are paying 9, 10, 11, 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And it frankly costs about the same to put a 1 megawatt solar system on the roof of a building as it does to put it in the middle of a field. And so it's a little bit more expensive, but not much. And it doesn't tax the existing infrastructure as much, right? And so I think we're going to need to double down on how many of these 1 to 5 megawatt rooftops we're filling up.
I've had the pleasure of covering your contributions to this industry for longer than I'd like to mention. But here's a quote from 2009 from Jigar Shah, that the technology will never be the bottleneck. The bottleneck is implementation and the ability to attract capital. That's a 14-year-old quote. It still stands pretty well. But so certainly the bottleneck now is implementation, getting the money to the factories, understanding the tax code. Is the ability to attract capital solved, or a much better than we're in a much better situation than we were a decade ago?
Well, I think the Loan Programs Office plays a critical role here, right? I mean, we do not want to compete with the private sector. And so if the private sector will put money into these projects, then they are going to, the entrepreneurs are going to choose to work with the local bank that they know how to work with, right? But what we're finding is the private sector is not that interested in manufacturing loans, right? They really want to take credit risk, right? So if it's a investment grade credit, they'll give them a corporate loan and they can use that for manufacturing. But if you're a startup company or you're a smaller company that doesn't have an investment grade credit rating, you're likely not to be able to get a loan from the private sector. And so then we fill in the gap to be able to do that so that we can help these entrepreneurs live out their dreams and, figure out how to be more helpful to, the overall cause of decarbonization, right? And so I think the fact that we exist allows corporate financing and entrepreneurs to move more confidently through their business plan. And, they're going to make choices. And the goal for us also is to give the private sector a backbone, right? And say, hey, we're willing to do this. And in some cases, some of the private sector players are like, oh, maybe we were being a little too conservative. Maybe we should step in and do that. And that would please me to no end if they stepped in and took us out of the game for that particular sector.
Well, so the private sector is also not going to be investing in many tribal applications or at-risk community applications, right? So talk a little bit about getting manufacturing at tribal sites, at-risk communities. How can we make sure that they're not excluded from the energy transition? And if it's not commercial lenders that are going to be doing it, do we have to? The LPO is integral to that. Is that the way?
We have $20 billion of funding for the Tribal Energy Loan Program, and we're getting huge amounts of interest, right? I mean, there's a lot of, as industrial sites are, largely spoken for. Right. And I think the vacancy rate on industrial sites in the United States is less than 1% today. And so, now we're looking at brownfield sites, right? And we're looking at converting those brownfield sites to manufacturing. And there's a lot of those.
The interest coming from the tribes, or is it coming from the potential investors
well, I think that in general, it initiates from the folks who are looking to build a manufacturing facility saying, hey, the last 3 sites that we almost closed on, someone else snapped up out from underneath us. We need a site. We need a place to put it. And, me saying, hey, have you thought about a tribe? Because some of these tribes actually have fantastic old mine lands or old sites that have good access to electricity, access to water, access to some of the things, the rail infrastructure that you need, right? And, might be good sites. And they, are saying, no, look, we never were shown any of these sites by our brokers. And a lot of the tribes are saying, this is a great opportunity for us. We'd love to borrow money from the Tribal Energy Program. We'll build to suit this facility, and then we'll host the manufacturing facility, and they'll pay us rent for that site. And if, in the future that particular company goes out of business, then a new company could come into that site and manufacture there. But more importantly, there's a tremendous amount of skilled labor in that area, right? Mm-hmm. So, when you think about like the Navajo, they had a lot of skilled labor working in their coal mines as well as their coal power plants, some of which have been shut down recently. And so you've got very, highly trained workers looking for a place to work. So, there aren't that many places in our current full employment economy where you have a big group of workers that, are trained already.
Sure. So you've been in the solar world for decades, and I think when we started...
Now you're just dating me.
Sorry.
I still look young, according to my wife.
It's true. At one point, we did have some semblance of a integrated solar supply chain. We made polysilicon in the United States. We made wafers in the United States.
We still make polysilicon in the United States. We don't make wafers in the United States, but yeah.
So you're faced with this. We're faced with this challenge of building an industry, not just, as I mentioned, not just assembling, but everything from critical materials to the customer. Tell me about and we want to compete with China in this regard to some extent. That's a lot harder than just building a module factory. And it doesn't work if you don't have those commodities, those critical minerals. So tell me the strategy on critical minerals, whether it be lithium or cells or, tell me more.
So I think that in general, we spend way too much time talking about China. I would say in general, what we should talk about is the fact that we had several decades, probably since the 1980s, where the United States decided that its manufacturing expertise should atrophy, right? And that we're not going to keep this cutting edge knowledge here in this country. And we allowed it to go to other continents, not just China, but Europe and other places, right? And we had fantastic technologies that we invented out of the Department of Energy, and we softly sort of encouraged them to go to other continents to commercialize their technology. That is changing today, and we need to do it here. Now, the expertise exists largely elsewhere. So that means particularly in lithium-ion batteries, for instance, and in solar manufacturing, there's a lot of expertise in Japan, Korea, China, and other places, right? Even in Germany. And so we need to bring that expertise here and to link that expertise to the American worker and have that knowledge get transferred back to the United States, which I think is great. Separately, on a risk basis, right? In the same way that we don't love the power that OPEC has over oil, we also don't want a concentration of risk with any one government or country because things change, right? And these are 20 plus year investments. And so we want to make sure there's a diversity of decision-making around where critical minerals come from, where wafers come from, et cetera, right? And so when you think about what we're trying to do, China, for instance, does have a lot of concentration of processing capacity, but we also acknowledge that we need to go to 10 to 13x of our critical mineral capacity globally by 2030 to meet the rising demand for electric vehicles, which was highlighted by a Bloomberg report this morning, right? And so the question becomes, when you support that 10 to 13x, how do you want that X to occur, right? Now, the critical minerals are not all coming from China. Those critical minerals are coming from Argentina, from Chile, from the United States is blessed with extraordinary amounts of lithium, as well as some cobalt, some graphite. So we have that mining and that ore around the world, right? And now those people also want to diversify. They don't want to only sell to Chinese processing facilities. They want to sell to lots of processing facilities so they can get a good price for their ore, right? They want to make sure that there's a vibrant marketplace for their ore. And so we're helping them create that vibrant marketplace, right? And so I think it's important for people to recognize that for the people that we're working with, whether it's on wafer and poly procurement or whether it's on critical mineral procurement, we're not asking them to pay a premium for, being anti-Chinese. We're asking them to practice in good risk management practices,
diversify,
diversify.
For sure.
And they themselves want to do that. So they're explaining to us how they're doing it.
All right. Getting back to the LPO specific questions. Tell us, I guess, what are the trade-offs or the difficult trade-offs you find yourself making when you're considering making a loan? And we're also getting lots of great questions
Sure.
from our people, but from the audience. But tell us a little bit about the LPO. What serious trade-offs you have to make. What do you consider or a little bit about how the due diligence works?
Sure.
And yeah, please.
So just to be clear, I mean, I really do think that we get ourselves in trouble when we think that we're doing something custom because of, the political environment that we live in today. LPO has been doing a lot of these trade-off analyses since its inception, right? So this is not like a new thing as much as it's part of what you do when you have to own a loan for 20 years, right? So we do KYC, right? Know your customer, for all of the management teams. We do it also for the investors, right? And so we've thrown out deals that were funded by Russian oligarchs in the past, right? So this is not a China thing. It's more of if someone basically is making decisions that may be on the basis of non-commercial reasons, non-logical reasons, then we're worried about them making a decision that would hurt the company's ability to pay back our debt, right? And so we check for those things, right? And so we largely check for those things at the very beginning of the process because nobody wants to go through the entire due diligence process only to get thrown out at the end. So we largely do that work in the beginning, and we say to them, look, you have this investor. This investor has been involved in problematic behavior in the past. Here are 3 examples. And so we would like for you to make sure that you protect us from that problematic behavior in these 3 or 4 ways, right? We want to make sure they don't have undue influence on the board. We want to make sure that they have strict IP protection. We want to make sure that you're ramping up your ability to spot foreign talent recruitment programs, right? We want to make sure that you have these types of protections, right? And frankly, for most of the entrepreneurs we're talking to, you're like, what are you talking about? This is the first we've heard about these things. And we're like, well, welcome to the world of, folks doing bad things. And they're like, wow, this is great. Like, thank you for educating us. We are going to implement these programs right away, right? Because they want to do risk management. So in general, I wouldn't say that there are trade-offs as much as it's risk management, right? For us, we're saying in the same way that we do feedstock. I'll give you a sort of controversial example. For a lot of biofuels companies, they were using FOGs, right? Fats, oils, and greases, right? The people who collect fats, oils, and greases have a monopoly on their territory. There's only so many vans that pick up this fats, oils, and greases. We would never provide a loan to somebody who only uses fats, oils, and greases because you know what? Once we do that, they triple the price of their commodity and put that plant into bankruptcy, right? And so we also make them protect themselves from normal risks around market concentration and feedstock.
All right. We're being we had upwards of 1,000 people registered for the event, and we have a smart audience. We're getting smart questions.
Not surprised.
Some we're not going to ask because they're diving into the weeds of.
Well, they can always hit me up on Twitter. I'll respond.
Okay. All right. Well, no, we're not going to ask that. Sorry. Well, so I want to get back to tribes because that's undercovered and important. And so do you have is there a matchmaking process within the LPO to work on bringing manufacturing to the tribes? Is there some type of ombudsman? That's the wrong word. For that to facilitate that, or is there some type of council that helps you in that regard? We're getting a lot of questions on.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so let's first start with the fact that the reason you would pick a tribe is because of some of the things we've already talked about, but also because there are a lot of these bonus adders, right? For tribal land, for energy communities, for justice, for domestic content. And so, if gamed correctly, you could get to 50, 60%, sort of tax credits, right, on some of these things, right? And so it can be a good economic decision for people to go that way. The other thing I'd say on the tribes, just in terms of power production, is some of the best wind and solar land in the entire country is tribal land. And so even if you're just trying to focus on building the best, most profitable solar and wind projects, it could be on tribal land. And those are the places that haven't been picked over, that have good transmission line access and some of those other things, right? So there's that piece. In terms of your matchmaking question, so we do formal matchmaking within the government through a group called Select USA at the Department of Commerce. I'd say that their ability to do it in the tribal space is being enhanced today. So we do a lot of supplementing there with the Office of Indian Energy out of the Department of Energy, as well as the Loan Programs Office. So we have 10 full-time people and the Tribal Energy Office that do a lot of that work. And so on the one hand, we're educating the tribes around all these programs and all these benefits to them, because for some of them, they're hearing it for the first time, right? And we just participated in a great conference in Minnesota this week, but also, lots of other places. And so I think we probably travel to one or two events every week to these, tribal events around the country to educate folks. Pick a number, let's call it 20 to 30 tribes that have put their hand up and said, yeah, we want to engage in these kinds of conversations. And so then as people come into us and say, hey, we'd like to take advantage of this, we try to put people in touch with folks that have these types of opportunities. Some of the tribes are better staffed and prepared, like the Navajo are better prepared and staffed for this. Some of the tribes are less prepared. And so we try our best to work within the capacity that some of the tribes have. But there's definitely a lot of interest, and that's great. The other thing, I didn't know, frankly, just because I'm naive, before I took this job, is that we have 30 tribal colleges and universities across the country. And so once I tell people that, they're like, actually, we'd like to recruit from those places. And so we've gotten a lot of folks who've started posting their jobs there and recruiting from those places, which has been, really fantastic to see.
Well, count me in as in the naive group, because that's news to me. And this is something Canary Media needs to cover more of, so for sure. Whenever we publish an article about heat pumps, we toyed with the idea of being heat pump media, because they're extremely popular, and even though they're somewhat quotidian in the rest of the world, they're exotic technology in the United States for some reason. So what is the LPO doing? Have you seen a lot of heat pump action, heat pump manufacturing for residential or commercial scale? It seems like that's a crucial part of the decarbonization process in the built environment. Is there as much excitement in the Loan Programs Office and in manufacturing as there is at Canary Media for heat pumps?
Sign me up for heat pump action. I mean, I think, as you know, or may know, almost all of the energy efficiency that's been driven in refrigerators come from heat pumps. So everyone already has a little heat pump in their refrigerator. That's how they got super efficient over the last 30 years. And now you're starting to see that technology get integrated into all new water heaters, right? It's a little expensive today, but they'll get cheap in the next couple of years as volumes go up. You also saw in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, a huge emphasis on manufacturing here in the United States. And so you've seen major announcements from Carrier and others to start manufacturing heat pumps here in the United States. And so we're excited to see that. And we are absolutely supportive of those types of applications. The other thing you've seen is that, as you know, not unlike solar panels or other things, heat pumps can be slightly more expensive than the lowest cost option that you have for air conditioning. And so when we did our, loan work with Hestia, that we announced recently. One of the technologies that's allowed to be financed within that thing are heat pumps, right? And you're starting to see all the major solar financing companies, including heat pumps as one of the eligible items for financing, which makes it much easier so that as you save money with the lower energy bills, you can use some of that to pay off the higher upfront cost for going with a heat pump. And so that's been very exciting to see as well. But I think the last thing I'd say is that the Department of Energy has invested heavily into the next generation of heat pumps. And I think you've seen that with very public announcements from the private sector where they've said, due to the DOE R&D funding, they've been able to get their heat pumps not only to 0 degrees, but down to negative 15 degrees now. And they believe that they can get them even lower. And so now you start to see that the range is expanding, right? So it's always been the case that new home manufacturing just puts heat pumps in standard, particularly south of the Mason-Dixon line. But now you're starting to see home manufacturers north of that line starting to put heat pumps in as standard, because they're starting to say, actually, we can meet the customer service requirements of our customers that way. And lastly, I would say that a lot of this is education, right? So there's so many people who get their recommendation from their contractor, and their contractors are just not pushing heat pumps. And so I think a lot of what the secretary is doing, along with the Department of Energy, is just making sure that people really have choice and knowing that they actually have this this opportunity that, frankly, is as American as any other technology that they can choose from.
There's a workplace development issue around all of these things. There's not enough electricians. There's not enough HVAC folks.
Yeah.
There's not enough women electricians. I know this is probably, you don't do everything. You can't do everything at the LGO.
We try to do everything here at the Department of Energy.
Is this something that you address? Is that something that you address?
It is. I mean, like, as I was suggesting with the tribal colleges and universities, I do think that there is a thoughtfulness around workforce that has also atrophied in our country over the last few decades. If you think about, General Motors, helped stand up Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology because it wanted a pipeline of engineers and workers for its facilities, right? And so when you think about many of the companies that we're providing loans to, they actually are making a multi-decade commitment to that community. And we're asking them in their community benefits plan, hey, what is your workforce strategy? Are you just going to put it on Indeed.com? And, it turns out that a lot of folks are being very thoughtful. They're partnering with the local community college. There's lots of money from the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, to be able to fund these programs in these community colleges. But the community college actually has to ask their requisite funder for that money, right? They have to put an application in and say, hey, we want to train people for this particular thing, and therefore please give us a $50,000 grant for this curriculum, which already exists, that we want to teach here at the community college, right? And so you're starting to see a lot of folks actually reach down into high schools. And so when you look at a lot of the plans that GM Ultium has published around what they're doing, they're going to disadvantaged communities and high schools and saying, look, you have a choice. You can absolutely go to college, and if you want to, you should, but you also have the ability to make 6 figures by going into the trades. And that may be the right choice for you. And frankly, a lot of college counselors and a lot of folks haven't been telling students that this is a choice. And so, folks are starting to choose that. And, across genders. I mean, one of the extraordinary people in our office is a woman named Amy Peterson. And, she most recently worked at the city of New York and worked on Sandy cleanup and, got a lot of union workers in there doing the Sandy cleanup, because that's not required. Davis-Bacon is not required for FEMA. And she's also worked really closely to getting a lot more women to choose the trades as well. And so it's an issue near and dear to her heart. And so she makes sure that our applicants are reminded of that. And what you find is our applicants are looking to do every single good idea they can find to get good quality workers. And so we haven't had any pushback at all, whether it's union and non-union, or women, men, figuring out how to go to disadvantaged communities, figuring out how to, pull from tribal colleges and universities. I think folks are looking to do the right thing. They just don't often know how to do it.
So we have I think a hard stop at 10:45, at which might end abruptly and send you to a home page. So I want to give that warning, and we probably only have time for another question or two. So Jigar, I just wrote a brief article about the solar announcements that have been made. There's 70 gigawatts of solar manufacturing announcements made. Obviously, that's announcements, right? They're not all going to happen. Yeah. They're not all going to get built, and they have different risks. One of our reporters and one of our content creators just went on a buddy movie driving tour of the South at battery and EV sites.
Yeah.
And there's this beautiful, enormous American hub of energy storage and EVs and recycling and raw materials being formed in front of our eyes. So I guess as one of our last questions, or our last question, put on your crystal ball, take us to 2030. How much? There's projections that we're going to build 50 and 60 and 70 gigawatts of solar per year in 2030, 2028, 2029. Tariffs have been imposed to improve our domestic manufacturing and attenuate our imports. What does 2030 look like? Are we still 50% dependent on China for our solar and EVs, or can we really create a soup to nuts supply chain that gets good domestic content, EVs, solar, wind nacelles, built in the United States? What is the realistic timeline where we go from 0% American silicon solar integrated solar modules to 50%?
Well, so let's start with what we're trying to accomplish, right? I think that we start with the fact that you and I know that we were a part of the 2012 tariffs, the 2015 tariffs. There was never a companion effort to really onshore manufacturing, right? Today, we have a companion effort to onshore manufacturing in the solar space. And ultimately, the reason for doing it is not, again, because folks are anti-China. The reason for doing it is because you and I both know that those companies have never consistently made money, right? And if you make your entire industry dependent upon a supply chain that doesn't follow any logical laws of capitalism, well, then at some point you could imagine, the Chinese government saying, we don't want to subsidize you anymore, right? And so we want to make sure there's a diversification of manufacturing, not just here in the United States, but also in India and also with other places around the world, so that we are making sure that there is a consistent and dependable supply of solar panels around the world, right? On top of that, almost all great technologies that have been invented in the world have either come out of Martin Green's lab in the University of New South Wales or the Department of Energy. And so we're tired of inventing everything and then having to license it to other places for their workers to benefit from that, right? And so we're making sure we do that here. The last thing I'd say is for many of these plants, they are becoming more automated. And so labor costs and some of those other things are not as important as they were in the past. And so you can actually sustain good quality jobs at these facilities and still make an affordable product, right? And so that needs to happen. And actually, one more thing, the last thing I'd say is, that we really need to get our mojo back. And I think that's happening. Right. I think that when we were talking about this during the era stimulus bill, there were a lot of people that I respected who basically said, you know what, I don't think America can build things. I don't think we can do these big things. Right. It's foolish for you to even think about it. And there were a lot of investors who told their entrepreneurs, if you remember, Suniva and some of those other companies were dedicated to manufacturing here and then were forced by their investors to go to Asia. Right. And so part of this is also sending a clear signal, not only to entrepreneurs who I think have a natural instinct for not wanting to live on an airplane to Asia, but also their investors and saying, look, America can do big things and we will do big things. Now figure out how to do it here. right? And so that environment, I think, allows people to make these decisions. And that environment is not easy. Everybody wants to be technocratic about it, but sometimes it's also a feeling, feeling of America's back, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that feeling is something that is really important as well. Now, to get to your specific question, I don't know the answer, but I do think it ties to the very beginning of the conversation, which is we need our companies in this country to reinvent themselves. The IRA has put together an entire package by which to reinvent themselves, from pursuing commercial and industrial rooftops, to doing community solar, to pursuing tribal lands, to figuring out all these other things. But we've got to get to 60, 70, 80 gigawatts a year of deployment to sustain 60, 70, 80 gigawatts of manufacturing here. Right now, we're at 30 gigawatts a year. And so right now, I think we will confidently get to 30 gigawatts a year of manufacturing. And if we actually get to 60, 70, 80 gigawatts, which I think that we have plans to do, and the Secretary has been quite articulate about it and how we're going to solve transmission, and I'm very confident we're going to get there. But I need to see more ambition from the industry. We have passed what we are going to pass, right? The IRA, bill, chips and science, these are historic pieces of legislation, right? Now figure out what the jigsaw puzzle pieces are on the table and figure out how you double and triple and quadruple the industry from those jigsaw puzzle pieces. And then I think manufacturing will follow.
All right. We're in the closing minutes. And again, if this closes abruptly, I want to finish before that. We're to all of the nuclear questions that have come in. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart as well as Jigar's, but we're going to do that in another webinar. It's going to be specifically on nuclear.
We're going to make this a series, Eric.
Indeed, we're ready. But I do want to repeat what Jigar said. We're getting our mojo back. We're the United States that's able to do big things after 20 years of 30 years of not doing and giving up our intellectual property. And we're reinventing manufacturing and energy attitudes in the United States. So
one last thing I'd say is that we've always invented everything here. I'm very proud of our invention capabilities. We've always been able to do it. Now we got to manufacture and deploy here as well. And I'm excited about, the tools that we have now to make that happen.
All right. Jigar, we're grateful for your presence at the LPO. We're grateful for you speaking with us in the first of a series of webinars we're going to be doing. Thank you for offering yourself up for that. This is recorded and will be online soon. Sign up for the Canary Media newsletter and feel free to support the nonprofit efforts of Canary Media. Jigar, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.